2025. This is the IPS Morning Deprogram. I want to go over the 4 repeated elements that have appeared in multiple examples of predictive and concurrent programming related to the Charlie Kirk squibbing. But I want to get into the specifics here. So when I'm talking about a source script, the hypothetical source script, every simulated PSYOP event is going to have a script. We don't have access to it, but this would supply the content that would then be converted into instances of predictive content, foreshadowing, product placement, you could say. So starting with the source script concept, I've listed the common denominators that appear in the other instances of this type of merging of entertainment content with the real event, so-called predictive programming. So we have 1998 Snake Eyes, Emerson Drive 2012, Tempest in 2025, Americana, Heads of State, the podcast Thought Crimes, which was Charlie Kirk's podcast, was from 2024. And then we have Erica Kirk's reference to the storm at the Charlie Kirk Memorial that figures into this. So the 4 repeated elements are what I want to focus on. What's up, Kevin Mooring? He says, have you watched House of Dynamite on Netflix? No, I haven't watched House of Dynamite on Netflix. What does it portend for tomorrow? So the source script would contain, presumably, all of the common denominators that have been spread across this 27-year time. So this is 1998. That's 2025. So let's start with just go over this list. You have the storm would be a common denominator. The date, September 10th. Tyler, an executioner. These are, again, whoever Tyler is in the script is going to show up as an executioner. And then you have a very specific location for a neck wound. And that would be on the left side of the assassin. So we start with Snake Eyes, and I guess we could just add in Kirk. I mean, that just kind of goes without saying. But, so it would be kind of 5. So we'll go here. So Snake Eyes had the storm. It had Jezebel, which was a hurricane. But at the very beginning of the movie, the news manager said, call it a storm. And specifically, call it a storm, because hurricane would have deterred people from buying tickets. So you have that one. Then you've got the date on the sign that said Tyler the Executioner. So you've got Tyler the Executioner, who was one of the boxers. Now the date was 9/19 on the movie, but everybody thought it was 9/10. Does it matter? Not really. I mean, the ambiguity there was noted, but the important thing was the overlap that I think was significant was Tyler the Executioner, the guy getting shot's name, Charlie Kirk Land. So you have that element. And then you get shot on the left side of the neck. So these are the repeated elements that we see in Snake Eyes. And I could add on a couple of other things, but let's move on. Yeah, Kevin Mooring, that's right. You did have other things in Snake Eyes. I'm only talking about the common denominators, because you had the 9/10, you had the guy in the audience shouting, just like the guy we saw for Charlie Kirk. So there are a number of things I'm not looking at. I'm only looking at the common denominators that are through all of them, not necessarily the things that were reflected in the real event and subsequent events, which make our case even stronger. So now let's move up to Emerson Drive. Emerson Drive had the 9/10 reference in 2 ways. One, Erica Kirk is in it, so we'll put Kirk in here. She's in this video, and she swings by on a zip tie. The number is 9/10, above Fremont. But in the comments, another 9/10, 2012, she thanks Tyler, there's Tyler again, for the shoot and having a blast. So if you combine Tyler, blast, shoot, 910, you can see how that, again, would tie into this. There's no neck wound or storm in there, but it had these other 3 elements, one of them repeated, so 4 elements. Next, we're going to go up to 2024, episode 33 of Thought Crimes, hosted by Charlie Kirk. So they have Kirk again in the association. And he says he'd like to see a televised execution. And his co-host named Tyler, there's Tyler, talks about an execution. Repeated element. And he says the last public execution was 9/10, referring to 9/10/77. And this would be a guillotine, which is a neck wound, not in that specific location, but it's implied. So again, repeated elements. The only one that's not in this one is storm, but you could see other connections. Thought Crimes, episode 33, they caught the shooter 33 hours later, that kind of thing. So let's move forward to 2025. Tempest, which means storm. In Tempest, you have the Charlie Kirk-esque characters in a church who gets shot in the neck. So you have the neck wound. And you don't have the name Kirk. He's in a church. You could make that inference. Charlie Kirk went there. So I'm going to put that. Charlie Kirk went to South Korea and addressed the corresponding youth Republicans that his movie character was speaking to when he got killed. So you have that overlap. And then you have multiple examples of the Tempest character, the widow, mirroring Erica Kirk, which we'll get into. Americana just had a neck wound. This one is significant because 2025 and the precise location of the neck wound. And then if you take the theme or the symbolism here of Americana being shot in the neck like that, that's pretty much what happened with Charlie Kirk. If you look at the significance of Turning Point USA, America Comeback Tour, the Turning Point, it all references this turning back to MAGA, to this idealized past, to Americana. Heads of state, a couple of ones here. Vice President Kirk, so you have the Kirk name, and she's shot in that same part of her neck, another repeated element. And the actress, Elizabeth Kirk, the actress is next to Charlie Kirkland in the 1998 Snake Eyes, when he gets shot in the neck. So you got this connection between VP Kirk and Charlie Kirkland and this common denominator of the shooting happening in the same spot. So if we go down the list here, what you're seeing are the common denominators, not all the nuances and the other examples of foreshadowing, which get very specific the closer you get to 2025. I mean, they made it clear in Snake Eyes that the blonde was a femme fatale, a Jezebel, a deceiver, maybe even someone who conspired, a conspirator. And that's kind of the similar role that she's been put into in real life, and that's what she's accused of in The Tempest, of being part of the event. So now we're looking at this, just the common denominators, because each of these has other examples like we've been discussing. We could go into the nuance. But the main thing is, if you just look at the common denominators that are apparent in all of these examples, beginning with Snake Eyes, you can kind of see here that these would be the things that you would find in the source script. So you have a source script, and what do you do with it? You hand it to, hey, Brian De Palma. I need you to put these elements in a movie. Background, some kind of a storm. Tyler's got to be a killer. We need a neck wound here, killed the guy named Kirk. And if you go down the list here, you could see how, okay, these elements are what you would consider product placement for the future PSYOP. And if you look at any examples, any body of predictive content for a PSYOP, because predictive programming only leads to fake events. One of the greatest examples is 9/11. Or even 3/11, which is when the pandemic was declared, where you can find stuff with specificity. So when somebody looks at all the different predictive programming elements for 2020 and the pandemic, you'll see common denominators like the date, 3/11. The numbers 3/11 are inculcated into stuff in very slick ways. And other things, like, here's an example. If we're talking about common denominators for predictive content that you see throughout the lead up to 2020, 10 years prior to the day, 3/11/2010, on The Office, which was the 119th episode, but The Office, the theme was somebody at work was wearing a mask and everybody thought it was weird, and it had to do with the flu or something. But the date, the flu reference, and a couple of other things that stood out just seemed a little too coincidental. Then we saw 3/11 in Colony, where season 3, episode 11, where they said Seattle's going to be ground zero for the reboot of civilization after this alien takeover. But you never see the aliens; they're invisible. But the government capitulates, and everybody's basically locked down. So you have the similar situation, but they specifically say 3/11 is the episode 3/11. They said Seattle is the, and Seattle would be another one of these repeated elements. Ground zero for the reboot of civilization. So with that one, you would say, okay, well, Seattle is an element as ground zero. And you'll remember the Great Reset, the reset theme, or reboot of civilization. And then 3/11. So this 3/11 Seattle ground zero thing, we actually picked up on in 2019. And a lot of the stuff is kind of ambiguously, it's either 11/3 or 3/11. So we were looking at Seattle, 11/3/2019, as a possible date for some kind of ground zero event. So ground zero had us thinking nukes. And a lot of the foreshadowing would suggest this. But pandemics also have ground zeros. And again, these are just commonalities between the predictive content. Why the Seattle? Why the ground zero? What's with the Space Needle? And the Space Needle may have just been a representative of the pokey. It doesn't have to necessarily be the structure. But we're like with 9/11 as well. How many times do you see the numbers 911 show up in the context of predicting that event? So now I'm going through various big events and the corresponding entertainment reinforcement, because that's really one of the big secrets here, and this is something I think is carefully guarded, is that entertainment, you can consider bread and circuses to be one of the functions of entertainment. It serves government. Entertainment reinforces psyops. There's a fusion of real and fake when they manufacture events, but it's accomplished through this mechanism, through this relationship. So the relationship between entertainment and psyops is what I'm emphasizing here. This is something that a lot of truthers even balk at. They don't want to believe it for whatever reason. I'm not calling them shills or gatekeepers, but I think they generally don't want to believe it. I don't know why that is. I mean, your media is compromised, your worldview is compromised, billions of minds are under mind control and we're cool with it. Why should this particular facet bother us? Because this reveals so much about how this thing works. This lets you list names of parties involved. Individual artists who have sold out their work, sold out their art for the purposes of the manufactured history, which creates the worldview for all of us Trumans in this collective Truman Show. But my objective here is to go through every event using Perplexity AI and other tools that we have that make this much more efficient. But I want to get to this point where we can determine what is on the source script under the presumption that every fake event has a script. And these are the scripts that are added on to our real history. So we have our real world, which is kind of probably boring by comparison. And they throw in these manufactured events. And so with the common denominators, it lets you put a date on it as far as how old is this event, how far back was it scheduled. And these another common denominator I could have added here, 2025, would be Ryan Routh attempting to stab himself in the neck, and he points at the same spot where Kirk was hit, and his connection to Trump. I could also add Charlie Kirk's "Enough is Enough," his final YouTube post. Because what we're finding is that the people in this event, the subjects of it, the Kirks themselves, were actually part of this process of planting these seeds. Copaesthetic says, "I'm feeling the new whiteboard visuals." Kenley says, "That dry erase board got busy quickly." Well, you know what's great about this is you can screen cap it and give it to any AI and have them put it into legible font. And that's one of my plans here. We want to do a real nice, formatted, easy to read, poster size breakdown of every event in terms of the predictive content leading to it, where we filter out the common denominators, and then we look at what we can extrapolate from that. And we just go down the list, and I think it should be revealing. I've been toying with this idea for a while, because one thing that I think people miss is that, yeah, it's easy to call things real or fake. Like, people call things fake all the time, like it's a revelation, but what they're missing is that it's bigger than just that single anomalous event, and calling things fake is no longer an indicator of insight. It's just, at this point, it's common sense and redundant. I think we need to go deeper. So if it's fake, and we started getting into this, who's the likely meta-scripter? What directors contributed to this event? So in this case, if we were to look at contributors who are presumably part of it, you could include anybody who's writing, whose script, whose film content became part of it. And so it was something like 9/11, which is pretty complex. You're going to have Stanley Kubrick as one of the first. You're going to have the director of Back to the Future. You're going to have the James Cameron, Thomas Clancy. And we go down the list, but we want to find out what are the common things that are planted in all of these. And what that will do is that will give us an idea of what's in the source script and how old is it. So again, the Charlie Kirk event would, by all these indications, have been planted into our timeline or scheduled to go into our timeline 27 years before it happened. That's the big reveal. You think about the magnitude of this. Like, how many decades in advance did they plan 9/11 or even 2020? And how much control over time do they have? And there are many hints that we find throughout a lot of these movies that indicate this type of control. Dark City, Matrix, both of which were infused into the more recent Megalopolis, where it's called the Design Authority. So the Design Authority wear these black-rimmed hats, very Saturnian, dressed in black. They freeze time. They detonate something in downtown New York. Like they're 9/11ing New York. And they look just like the strangers from Dark City, who stop time and rearrange everybody's lives. And what's interesting about this one is of course, that the Dark City seemed to have been fused into Coppola's new movie. Just as the main character, Adam Driver, looks conspicuously like Neo from The Matrix. The savior, Neo. And what makes that even more clear, because that was my first impression, I thought, why does this guy look like Neo? Who the hell is this? Well, I learned it's Adam Driver. But throughout the movie, he's got a driver named, I don't know his name, but it's Lawrence Fishburne. And his driver looks like Morpheus, acts like Morpheus, talks like Morpheus. But whereas Morpheus described to Neo the nature of space, the Matrix, in his new movie, Coppola's movie, Megalopolis, he's explaining the nature of time. So you have Neo getting this lecture on time and space in analogous situations. Duetze Les says, call one of those movie directors and ask if they're currently hiring assistant metascripters. Kenneth Dixon says, the script has been running at least since 1582. The demise of this country was scripted since before it was a country. Exactly. Exactly. That's one of the main themes here. And this shows up in the Titanic, which had predictive content. I think the Titanic is a metaphor for the sinking of the West. And this is reiterated, and this is really fascinating with 9/11, when you get into the connection between James Cameron, the Titanic, the movie, the real thing, and 9/11, and presumably his involvement in that particular psyop and others. James Cameron is one of the more interesting metascriptors. Can't wait to get into that one. But as far as who's in the know, I don't think they would have to be. I really think, okay, you could be Francis Ford Coppola, you could be James Cameron, and you're working on a script, you get a knock on your door, and the design authority shows up. You know, men in black, black-rimmed hats, they're the ones who control time. And by controlling time in the movie, Megalopolis, they push a button and time freezes. But what we're talking about is a little less poetic. They're controlling time by imposing a false historic narrative over the real thing. So like, hey, this is design authority. We're going to control time. We need you to put these ideas, these characters, these concepts into the mass consciousness. And you're going to be reaching millions of people. You're rich and famous. You're a propaganda conduit. And so they're given a few innocuous things. Fine. I'll include a reference to an executioner named Tyler. Somebody gets shot in the neck. We'll make a big storm. It'll be on September 10th. And some guy in the movie will be named Kirk. No big deal. They're given these random puzzle pieces to plug in. How easy is that? And from the outside, an uninitiated perspective, all of these are just merely coincidences. And this would explain how something like The Tempest, a South Korean spy thriller, could be so entangled with an American psyop on the same day, with all of the plot points following the widow and her story. And as they got closer to 2025, I think it would become therefore easier to put more specific cues in there. Copaesthetic says this gambling thing in the news is 100% a psyop. Yeah, it's probably muddying the waters. Like the term fake news got out, and a lot of people over on our side of the web were like, oh, wow, people are going to figure out the massive scandal of news faking events. But that never got that far. Fake news just became a pejorative to call the other side. And even among those who notice the fake events, many of them don't go deep enough. And that's my point here. They'll say, what does it matter if he's dead or not? Well, it does matter. And all you need to do is ask a few follow-up questions. You know, like, okay, CK, is he alive or is he dead? First of all, there's no evidence that he's dead. Unless you consider the screen to be evidence. I mean, from my perspective, like there's no reason for ambiguity here. You don't give the benefit of the doubt, the default perspective to the mainstream on these types of events with all the surrounding hoax indicators. But if he's dead, who did it? Antifa, left wing, or Israel? Those are your only two options. And they've purposefully made it seem like it's this one and the other side is covering up. That's why Candace Owens is melting down about Trump betraying him. This is all scripted narrative. And the scripted narratives, the the well-paved rabbit trails are some of the strongest indicators of how the whole thing is fake. But then if he's alive, if he was squibbed and not shot, if it was a magic show and not a snuff film, because it's been a magic show this whole time. Why would this deviate? But let's just, hypothetically, some people think they saw a snuff film. Yeah, Dark Ghost Wind, the Lupin show and the Louvre heist. Not only does that match up in terms of the synchronization, but the symbolism of the crown jewels being stolen ties into the No Kings protest. And in the show, they stole the necklace of Marie Antoinette, who lost her head during a No Kings protest. So they aligned it with the protests of the day as well. So now if he's alive, then we can ask, well, who knows? And we can start listing all the people around him who carried his body. Like the author who was on Fox News, Frank Turek, who has 2 books. One of them has the word God with like a bullet hole in the middle, and the other has a globe covered in the trans flag colors with a bullet hole shattering it, which are both kind of, I would say, indicators of what's to come, although these books were likely published before he even knew Charlie Kirk, which is interesting, considering his role in moving the body. You would have to conclude Erica Kirk, and unless you want to believe that Donald Trump is a complete dupe, you maybe could have said, well, maybe he doesn't know, but you can't say that anymore because Butler, Pennsylvania required his participation. So DJT is in the know. He would know Charlie Kirk's alive, which is why when they asked him, how do you feel about your 4th son being killed? He's like, well, we just remodeled the dining room in the White House. You got to see it. He didn't seem all that moved. But then you have to talk about also, well, who in the media is complicit? Media complicity. And you can go down the list of reporters and news agencies, and you can, through this process, you can remove plausible deniability. And the premise that he's alive or dead, it's not something to be, maybe he is, maybe he isn't. It's if he is, it's actually a really big deal. If he's alive, it's a big deal because it exposes the entire infrastructure of worldview warfare and how they can fake historic events. And if he's alive, then it also lends credence to our entire extrapolation based on the entertainment content that would suggest that this was a scripted character, he was never really Charlie Kirk, and he was scheduled to die on that date. Kenneth Dixon says, your government hates you and wants you dead. Your job is to not get dead. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if they want to give us life extension to get more out of us. And if we're sheep. People say, like, oh, McDonald's will kill you. Fast food will kill you. I'm like, I'm pretty sure they're putting life extension in the Big Macs. Because their objective, if it's greed, if it's making money, it's not going to be to kill their clientele. So no, they want you to live a long time. They want to extend your consciousness infinitely with digital uploads, probably. I don't think anybody's out to kill us. All right, now, I'm just suggesting here that we need to go a bit deeper, that it's not enough to call things fake, and it's not acceptable to misidentify the entertainment relationship to PSYOPs as mere coincidence, which has been ruled out thanks to this CK event more than any other. But we also have to rule out the more arcane explanations about, this is there's this guy on Twitter, big channel, and within 5 seconds of describing snake eyes, he brings up quantum physics. It's like, what do you mean? Quantum physics? You're not a quantum physicist, you're a YouTuber, and you're making these claims about old movies that none of us watched somehow materializing and magically causing this guy to get shot. I mean, that's just crazy talk. And that kind of erroneous conclusion, which mystifies the very mundane phenomenon of propaganda, is used against this entire body of research. This is empirical research. We're just observing and recording and documenting. And these are connections. Now, you have a few different ways to go with these connections. You can but at this point, denying them is reality denialism. We've made the case many times over. Misinterpreting them as something not intentional, that doesn't work anywhere. And I don't know why people insist that this is too complicated. Man could not have done this. I've heard that. It's like a mantra. Man could not have orchestrated all these connections. I'm pretty sure you're underestimating things. It's the analogy I bring up about the magic show. If you're in the seat, you're going to be fooled by the magic. If you're looking at the stage and where they tell you to look, it's going to trick your eyes. It's designed to. You have to get out of your seat. You have to get a different perspective. The mainstream perspective is the audience member at a magic show. And the alternative perspective is the same one. They just have a little different explanations, but they never actually get out of their seats. We've been wandering around the whole time. We've been reading the magic books. How do they perform these tricks? So it's going to get very interesting. I'm going to do a more formal series on these, but I'm not sure the title yet. But we want to have a series of videos where we go to the common denominators and seek out the source script for the events that augment our historic timeline. We're basically trying to reverse engineer the metascript. The metascript being history as it's proactively created, the script that is the source material for the proactive creation of the construct we call history. It's easy to understand how they can retroactively alter the past and rewrite things. Like, yeah, you can kind of get that. Like the mud flood idea, like some catastrophe wipes everything out and they start from scratch. But I think it's more relevant right now to look to how the future is being manufactured day by day. Kenley says, no doubt depopulation is their agenda. Maybe we're just being phased out and they're going to replace us with AI agents. Maybe that's the objective and has been the whole time. Unfortunately, a lot of our jobs, a lot of the things we do are eminently replaceable. So what does that mean? We're certainly being entertained. And I contend here that entertainment is a wing of government. And again, the biggest secret, the one we're not going to let go of, the one that is revealed, is that these events are scripted long in advance, which implies planning the future. That's the main point here. We're talking about our future is written in advance. Kenneth Dixon, yeah, Charlie Kirk was squibbed. He was squibbed. And anybody who says otherwise has to first refute every hoax indicator, every deviation from standard protocol. They have to explain away, because the burden of proof is not on us to prove that he's dead. Way too many hoax indicators. Everything I pointed out here tells us it was scripted. And this isn't mere conjecture. These are observable, documentable data points that are going to have to be considered by those who don't want to believe that our entertainment media serves an ulterior purpose. And is he dead? No, heck no. He's being repurposed. They don't kill crisis actors. They don't kill actors in movies. He's probably got a private island somewhere near New Zealand. He's snorkeling with George Floyd. Yeah, I mean, he was a real human being, flesh and blood, but he was essentially a script reader. Okay, so we'll continue this here a little bit later today. My phone battery's just about out.